Hi there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Travel and Sip. I'm here today with my good friend Ingrid. How are you going today, Ingrid?
Oh, I'm pretty well, thanks, Kieran. How are you?
Pretty good, and excited about our topic of conversation today because we're exploring one of the bigger countries in the world. So we're not going to go the whole hog, but we're going to really deep dive into Canada and in particular the Canadian Rockies. Ingrid, where does this rate in terms of destinations that you've been to?
Oh, where does it rate? Wow, that's a really good question, Kieran. I've actually been lucky enough to go a couple of times to the Canadian Rockies, and
Okay.
it's definitely up there with my favourite trips that I've done. Absolutely spectacularly beautiful scenery. If you love mountain scenery, then this is definitely got to be on your wish list.
Great.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've had a drink or two on those holidays, Ingrid. So tell me what's your accompanying drink today?
Yeah, so today, to be honest, probably not my favourite Canadian drink, but it was what I could find after a lot of searching for something
Uh-huh.
else and some alternatives. I wanted to drink a Canadian beer, just something a little bit different.
Sure.
Canadian microbrewery scene and craft brewery scene has boomed over the last 10 years, much like Australia's has. And they've got some fantastic craft breweries over there. So I was hoping to be able to get my hands on something from the Canadian Rockies region, but unfortunately couldn't. So what I've had to go with today is a good old Molson. So
Molson.
the most famous, biggest Canadian beer. It's actually co-owned by Coors in the USA. So they merged quite a long time ago now, but still brewed in
Right.
and is the biggest, I guess, the biggest name in Canada in terms of beer. So
The
I'm drinking.
Fosters of Canada, Ingrid.
Yeah, something along those
There
lines.
you go. Well, as long as it's cold and it's wet, hey, that's the main thing.
Absolutely.
Well,
What are you drinking?
Well, for me, I had similar issues. Do you know what? I know that there are some great wineries in this part of the world, the Okanagan region. So I really set out with the intention to have a lovely glass of Canadian wine today, but alas, like you, really struggled. So it's a bit of a travesty. Maybe there's an opportunity out there for someone who specialises in Canadian drinks. I've really just gone for, again, mass-produced Canadian Club.
Very
Did
nice.
spend a lot of time watching Mad Men last year, and this was the drink of choice. So there you are. So
Very good. Cheers, Kieran.
cheers, Ingrid. All right, so let's start our little tour of Canada. I guess Canada is a place that we've talked a lot about, Ingrid. We've had a lot of history with trains, and trains play a big part in this world. The Canadian Pacific Railway, or the Transcontinental Railway, was a major part of the development or the European settlement of this part of the world in the late 1800s, and really opened up the door and took advantage of that tourism boom in the Victorian era to open up this part of the world to tourists from Canada and from the US and other parts of the world. What we see as a result is some really grand railway hotels and really a place that's set up for tourism and a great place to travel, plenty to see, plenty to do, but still keeps some of that Wild West theme. So so we'll explore a little bit of that over the next few minutes. But I guess I start with that railway story, Ingrid. So when you're heading into the Rockies, a great way to do that is by train. Now,
Absolutely.
how have you done that? There's a couple of different ways to do it by train. What's
There
been
are.
your experience?
So I am actually lucky enough. Obviously, we've talked about it before, Kieran. We both work in travel, and I have been lucky enough to travel on the Rocky Mountaineer twice. I did one journey from Vancouver through to Banff, and I did the same thing the second time. So Vancouver through Banff, and I actually the second time travelled on to Calgary. The first time I travelled independently on to Jasper from Banff. So I've sort of done sort of a bit of that into the northern part of the Canadian Rockies, as well as over to the west of Calgary too. But obviously the other way you can do it is on the Canadian train. And I don't know, did you do that yourself between Jasper and Vancouver or vice versa, Kieran?
No, I didn't. I only went one way, and I also took the Rocky Mountaineer. So we've both been very fortunate in that regard. But plenty of colleagues who took the Canadian train on that route. A different experience, one that they all seem to love.
Absolutely. So I've been on the Canadian from Jasper, but heading east. So I just haven't done that section in the Rockies, so I can't speak to that. But the Canadian itself is a fantastic alternative service to the Rocky Mountaineer. If you can't afford the Rocky Mountaineer, or it's just not your cup of tea to travel on that style of train, then the Canadian is a fantastic alternative option if you don't want to be on a coach tour or self-drive.
And I guess by both methods, you'll see some terrific scenery. And the thing I noticed, Ingrid, is that the scenery, it takes 2 days on the Rocky Mountaineer. So day one, if you're departing out of Vancouver, you spend the night in Kamloops, and the train only travels during the daytime, so you can see the sights clearly and the landscapes clearly. And that day one is really quite a flat and arid landscape with lots of rivers and these sort of things running through, as we see in this image here. What were your memories of day one?
Yeah, a lot of rivers. That was probably my memory of day one, and not a lot of wildlife as well. So I felt that was more in day two than day one. And that is probably why a lot of people will suggest that you travel from Vancouver to Banff or Jasper rather than vice versa, because you do tend to get that build-up of possibly not, that beautiful traditional, Canadian Rocky Mountain scenery is in day two. So you're not sort of getting that in your first day and then you're sort of getting the rivers. The way that you do it from Vancouver is actually really beautiful because it's like a build-up. So you still enjoy the rivers and that landscape of day one before you build into day two. So
that's right. And the one thing that's a constant throughout on both days is the just the friendliness of the service on board. And Rocky Mountaineer do a fantastic job. You even, as you rock into Kamloops, you can even find a bit of a welcome from some Mounties, Ingrid. Yeah. And I guess the interesting thing here is that the one on the left is your photo, the one on the right is mine, 2 years apart. They're there every time the train goes past, aren't they?
They are, absolutely. Those guys are dressed in their Mountie outfits to welcome everybody to Kamloops on the train. So Kamloops is obviously pretty much in the centre, slap bang in the middle of Vancouver and Banff, and also right next to the Okanagan Valley that you mentioned before, which is obviously the famous wine region of British Columbia too, Kieran.
Absolutely. So Kamloops, a little stop there, and then the next day you're off again. And as you mentioned, you're then climbing into the Rockies. So we start to see, instead of rivers, we start to see some lakes, a little bit more greenery, these sort of things. And then, you're climbing into the mountains and you're right in there, aren't you? So, was it quite snowy at the time? What time of year were you travelling there on your first trip?
I was actually both times quite early in the season. Obviously, when you're travelling and you are a guest of Rocky Mountaineer, you tend to travel in those shoulder periods when there's space. Because the peak periods they can't afford to have travel guests on board because they're a completely full train. So
that's right.
So I travelled in that April, early May time, both times. The first time I travelled in 2009 was actually the second departure of the season. So that was right at the end of April. So quite snowy. And then the second time I travelled was in the second week of May, or maybe late in the first week, but it actually had been quite a bit warmer that season, so nowhere near as much snow the second time I did it.
Well, yes, mine was early May when I was on this trip, where you see this photo, and plenty of snow around. It was actually quite a late winter, I think, as well. So it depends. That shoulder season, it can be quite snowy.
Yeah.
It also might be quite warm, so you can get quite changeable weather in this part of the world.
Never know.
So, and you see one of the advantages here, lucky enough to travel in gold leaf. There's gold leaf and there's silver leaf on board the Rocky Mountaineer train. Gold leaf, you see here, gets the advantage of these panoramic windows, which really help when you're getting into the mountains, just to not miss out on any of the view. You get to see the whole thing. Silver leaf, though, is a fantastic service. The other difference being that gold leaf is 2 stories, so in gold leaf you get above the other trains going in the other direction. You get a little bit of a better view, but silver leaf service, you'll still get an amazing journey throughout. And one of the other memories I have is the food on board, Ingrid. So might just pop through to a couple of images there, but sensational. I think I probably put on 3 kilos in 2 days. It was quite memorable, and all local produce was kind of the thing, wasn't it? Sort of you've got Canadian salmon and Canadian beef and these sort of things that you're eating the whole time. Do you have any food memories?
I've got plenty of food memories, to be honest. I mean, the food on the Rocky Mountaineer was spectacular. But I actually have to say that the Canadian also does a fantastic job of their food. They've got a restaurant car on board too. So I actually have a fantastic memory of being on the Canadian train and getting called to dinner. I loved the way that they did that. You're in your sleeper cabin and they'll come here down the train. It's like, first dinner seating now, and they ring a little bell and everybody can come and, make their way up to the restaurant car and you sit down to a 3-course meal. And, those sort of memories, I think, and like you said, all local produce as well. So whether you're on the Rocky Mountain or the Canadian train, you're going to get fantastic local Canadian produce and beautiful salmon and it's beautiful vegetables and
I can even imagine just the way you describe that experience on the Canadian train. It's like taking yourself back to that Victorian era. The overnight experience on the train and these sort of things just there's something special about that too.
Absolutely. I love sleeping on trains. That's probably something that really is close to my heart and something I really enjoy doing. So I've done that quite a number of places around the world.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And look, the other special thing you can find traveling in this part of the world is some wonderful wildlife. So I'm just going to bring up something here, Ingrid. Can you spot that little fluffy thing in the corner there? That is. It's a bear. Yeah, there's a bear in there, Ingrid. It's a grizzly. You saw plenty of black bears, and you see them throughout. You see heaps of osprey and other birds. You see beaver dams, and there's a whole lot moose and elk and these sort of things going through. Mountain goats. You could just name the lot. But the highlight is seeing a grizzly bear and lucky enough to see one. I have one story, though, because we had someone else in our group on this trip, Ingrid, and she was a bear fanatic. She even wore a knitted jumper with a bear on it and had a bear beanie. And she was the one on the lookout for the bears the whole time. Now, we saw this bear the second day 2, after lunch. And as you probably can remember, you have this big lunch. You've got a few drinks maybe under your belt. It gets quite hot when the sun comes out, and it's good for napping. So we got up there. We saw the bear. We took our photos. Everyone was excited. We come back in and said, what's her name, Janine, or whatever her name was. And then, oh, no, she bloody slept. She'd napped through the bear, Ingrid, and missed it. The one bear. We saw one bear the whole time, and she missed it. So
no.
Janine. I don't think Janine was her name, but anyway, for all intents and purposes. So, so you've got to be aware. Don't take it for granted. That's my takeout. But look, as you head into the Rockies, it's a feature is the wildlife, and all jokes aside, this is one of your ones. So where are we here, Ingrid?
Yeah, this was actually the main street in Banff. So just after we got off the train in Banff, and we were headed to our hotel on the main street, and sure enough, there were the elk just hanging out. So
as you do.
We saw them throughout the few days we were in Banff as well. They're just everywhere, roaming the streets. I mean, you can see the car there, is just sort of carefully coming past to make sure that but yeah, they're used to it, the Canadians.
Absolutely. And that sort of heads into just chatting a little bit about some of these great Rocky villages and towns, Banff being this first one. So this looks like is this the Banff Gondola at the top there, or whereabouts is this?
Yeah. So this is the Banff Gondola. So this was my second trip in 2017. Yeah, this is right up the top. As you can see, it was a little bit foggy that day. The first time I went in 2009, it was actually really clear. The day that I went up Banff Gondola, but this day was quite foggy, and you can see there's a lot of snow up there as well.
Absolutely, plenty to do in Banff, and we talked a little bit about these Grand Railway hotels. So this is one of the first ones that you come across on that trip, which is the Banff Springs, and built in the style of a Scottish castle. I'm led to believe. Is that what you've heard?
Yeah. I have heard the same thing. It's like those British, style places that you see in the UK as well. So.
It's a real rabbit warren, I found. It's easy to get lost in. There's all these different wings and these sort of things. And this was one of the first ones, I think, built late 1800s, 1888 or somewhere around that mark. It's really quite spectacular, and from a distance you sort of see it coming up on the hill, and it's a tourist attraction in its own right, and sometimes you're lucky enough to stay there. The one thing I'd say is take your bathers when you stay there, because there's plenty of springs, and it's obviously Banff Springs, so plenty of springs to get in and have a little bit of healing in there. So something to do. But it's down the road from the main town and the main drag in Banff. Banff, any Banff memories, Ingrid?
To be honest, most of my memories of Banff are of bars.
And maybe some poutine, perhaps.
Yeah, there was a fair few bars visited with a few drinks both times. So yeah, the first time I was there was catching up with a friend who was living there at the time, an Australian friend, because to be honest, as it said in Banff, is basically as full of Australians as it is Canadians. So it's a very popular place for the working holiday for Australians. So a lot of Aussies there, and I had a friend there at the time. So yeah, he was showing us around the bars, which was fantastic. And then the second time I went was with a trip, so as a guest of the Canada Tourist Board. So I was actually with a group of travel people. So we were all together and got taken to a number of bars in town. So that's probably my biggest memory of Main Street Banff.
Yeah, and plenty of places to stay down the main street as well. If you're not going to stay in the Banff Springs or the Fairmont properties there's always some good options that are right in the middle of town and probably a little bit more convenient for all intents and purposes. Banff is a little bit of a walk, although I think they do have transfers, I'm sure. So I guess then moving along to our next stop is Lake Louise, iconic Lake Louise, and this is a hotel, the Fairmont Chateau Lake Louise, another of these Grand Railway hotels, this time built in the form of a French chateau. And this really, it takes prime position, doesn't it, Ingrid?
It does. It's a spectacular location. No matter what time of year you're there, if you're hoping to see the lake frozen, then yeah, you need to, you still might see that in May. There's a possibility there for that, but there's also a possibility that it'll start defrosting by sort of May time. So depending on what you're wanting to see and what you're wanting to do at Lake Louise, will sort of help guide you on what time of year you should go.
And again, Lake Louise is not in the main town, but it is quite self-sufficient. You can you can get all your needs catered for without having to go into the town of Lake Louise. But it is quite expensive. I found around there, so plenty of options. And the other thing people do if you're not staying at the hotel is to stay in town and you have a day trip out to the hotel, and it's lovely, and it's a beautiful place just to come for a day. Staying there though, my greatest memory was I had a lake view room, and the special thing about that was they had the curtains closed when I entered the room. So when I checked in, and the first thing you do obviously is open the curtains, and you get this spectacular view over the lake up to the glacier, and it's just spectacular. So that's very much a lasting memory for me from Lake Louise.
Absolutely gorgeous.
There we are. That was it. So I was definitely frozen. We were building snowmen on the lake in early May, but I think the year before we had someone from our work go at the same time, and it was that beautiful turquoise blue the same time of year. As I said, pretty changeable. And then once we sort of go out a bit further west, we head into Calgary, Ingrid. And Calgary is where I ended up, and there wasn't a lot going on when I was there, but I'm sure it's a great town. But then it comes to life one time every year. Tell us about this one, Ingrid.
Yeah, so the Calgary Stampede is when Calgary really comes alive. And this is actually not the real Stampede. I was not lucky enough to go there, which happens in July every year.
Tough to get tickets. Tough to get tickets.
Absolutely, very difficult to get tickets. But this one was actually I guess a pretend stampede that was put on for the travel industry for Canadian tourism, showcasing the product, obviously, to travel operators around the world who were visiting at that time. So I was lucky enough, Calgary was hosting the event. So they actually put on a little mini stampede event just for us to see what it was all about. We've all got our little cowboy hats on there. You can see the top of the hats there. And it was great fun, and a lot of fantastic memories actually from Calgary, thanks to the Calgary Tourism Board, who was hosting those events. So I actually had some really great fun experiences of music, food, wine, beer, and events like the Stampede when I was in Calgary. So I actually have fond memories of the city.
It's and I say there's not a lot to do, but I mean, that's comparative to the Stampede. It's a place where, you've got the Calgary Tower there, haven't you, which is a must do, and you get a great view over. But it's a great place to buy things like boots, leather goods, that sort of stuff as well. I mean, it is, you're in the West here, so you've got lots of farms and cowboys and that sort of stuff going on in Calgary. You can try some wonderful beef. They've got a great beef industry there, and even some bison steaks, I think, is probably the delicacy of that Alberta area. So plenty to do. And actually, my favourite railway hotel, I haven't got a picture of it here, but is the Fairmont Palliser there in Calgary. It's sensational. Takes you back to a different era. So check that one out too.
Yeah.
But Ingrid, I mean, we've only really touched the surface here. This and our trips have been there in summer. These places are. They sort of flip entirely during winter and become great places for skiing and snowboarding. There's some, obviously some great ski fields around as well. Is it on your list to go there in winter at all, Ingrid?
See, I'm not a big skier/snowboarder, so I probably don't have a great desire to go in winter. I'd actually probably really like to go in the height of summer. I feel like I've seen sort of part of that sort of snow and ice a couple of times now. So what I'd love to see is it in all its summer glory.
Yeah.
And getting out and doing some hiking. I've always wanted to go to Moraine Lake. I've heard fantastic things about that area and Moraine Lake Lodge. So I would love to go and stay there and do some hiking in the summer months. The Icefields Parkway up to Jasper, I only drove that just in one day to meet the Canadian train from Banff. So I'd love to actually take my time and do a little bit more exploring the glaciers and all of that along the Icefields Parkway, and then spending more time in Jasper, seeing waterfalls and doing hiking and that sort of thing. So that's probably something that I'd love to do in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk a little bit about the drive there, getting around. What's your advice to people if they're first-time travellers to the Rockies, Ingrid?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's pretty easy to do car hire if you want, but you also don't want to miss out on the scenery, which is what makes the train trip so good. So if you do take a train, whether that's the Rocky Mountaineer or the Canadian, you can either pick up car self-drive for part of it, or you can get coach transfers really easily as well between the train. So it's actually a really simple thing to do. If there's plenty of operators that organise that can do it for you. So it's a really easy thing to organise.
Absolutely. So look, well, I've really enjoyed taking ourselves back to Canada. As I said, it's only a little part of Canada that we've covered today, just the Rockies, but there's a heap more to it. We might come back and do another follow-up episode at some stage, Ingrid. But thanks so much for your insights and your memories. And
drink well and travel often. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers, Ingrid.